You've been draining yourself dry trying to stay visible, and you didn't even notice the power leaking out of you with every text you answer, every plan you keep, every presence you maintain out of fear that disappearing means dying. Everyone told you isolation is weakness. They were lying. The most dangerous people in history chose solitude deliberately. While you've been exhausting yourself maintaining connections, they've been building fortresses no one could breach. And here's the accusation that should make you uncomfortable right now: you're not maintaining relationships because you're strong. You're maintaining them because you're terrified of what you'd discover about yourself if you sat alone in a room long enough to actually hear your own thoughts. You confuse being surrounded with being secure. You mistake being seen with being significant. And every hour you spend performing for people who wouldn't notice your absence for 3 weeks is an hour you stole from the only project that actually matters, the construction of an unshakable self. Machiavelli understood something that most people still refuse to accept. Power is not built in crowds. Power is built in silence, in withdrawal, in the deliberate removal of yourself from the noise that keeps everyone else mediocre. The ruthless art Machiavelli perfected began with the recognition that the man who controls his own presence controls the game. Because absence is not absence. Absence is strategy. And the person who can disappear on purpose is infinitely more dangerous than the person who is always available. So here are 7 dark principles of strategic disappearance. Each one is going to cost you something. Each one is going to demand that you give up a comfort you've been clinging to. And each one is going to multiply a power you didn't know you had. Principle number 1, stop confusing loneliness with solitude, because one is destroying you and the other is weaponizing you. This is the first and most critical distinction, and almost everyone gets it wrong. Loneliness is what happens to you when you are alone and you hate it. It's the grinding, desperate ache of wanting company and not having it. It eats you from the inside. It makes you smaller, needier, more compliant, more willing to trade your principles for a seat at someone else's table. Loneliness is a wound. Solitude is a weapon. Solitude is what happens when you are alone and you chose it. When you walked into that empty room on purpose, locked the door behind you, and felt the silence settle over you like armor being strapped onto your body. Solitude doesn't drain you. It charges you. It returns you to yourself. It strips away every mask you've been wearing for other people and forces you to stand face to face with who you actually are. Most people can't survive that confrontation. That's why they fill every quiet moment with noise, with scrolling, with calls, with plans, with the constant buzzing distraction of other people's existence. They're not social. They're fleeing. They're running from the version of themselves that only appears when the audience leaves. And here's what that flight is costing you: every moment you spend escaping your own company is a moment you remain a stranger to yourself. You cannot strategize effectively if you don't know who you are. You cannot project power if you're not certain what's inside you. The lonely person is alone because they have no self to keep them company. The solitary person is alone because their self is the only company they trust. Which one are you? Be honest. When the phone goes quiet for 2 days, do you feel peace or panic? If you feel panic, you're not practicing solitude. You're suffering from loneliness and calling it a social life. The fix is not more connection. The fix is learning to sit in the silence until the silence becomes your ally instead of your enemy. The capacity to be alone is not a defect. It's a mark of emotional maturity so rare that most people will never develop it. And that rarity is exactly what makes it powerful. Principle number 2, understand that every social interaction dilutes your judgment, and start treating your mental clarity like territory you refuse to surrender. Seneca practiced withdrawal from the crowd for a specific reason: and it wasn't because he disliked people. It was because he understood something precise and mechanical about how the human mind works. Every conversation you have leaves residue. Every opinion someone expresses near you plants a seed in your thinking. Every emotional atmosphere you walk through clings to your internal state like perfume clings to clothing. You think you're immune to this. You think you can engage with the crowd all day and then retreat to your own mind and find it untouched. You can't. Social contact dilutes you. It's not a metaphor. It's a measurable, predictable process. Spend a day around anxious people and your own baseline of calm erodes. Spend a week around people who complain constantly and your internal monologue starts adopting their vocabulary of grievance. Spend a month around people who think small and your ambitions quietly shrink to fit the room. You are being shaped, constantly, by the minds you allow near yours. And you have been so conditioned to see this as normal, as just the cost of being social, that you don't even register the damage anymore. Seneca withdrew so that his judgment would remain his own. Not borrowed. Not contaminated. Not subtly bent by the gravitational pull of other people's fears and limitations. He understood that clarity is not the default state of the human mind. Clarity is what's left after you've removed every contaminating influence and let the sediment settle. You cannot see the bottom of a river while people are upstream, stirring up mud. You cannot hear your own strategic intelligence while 10 voices are offering their opinions on your life. And here's the cost: every day you spend immersed in social noise without deliberate withdrawal is a day your most important decisions are being made with a clouded mind. You're playing chess with fog on the board and wondering why you keep losing. The most formidable strategists in history required isolation to develop the edge that later made them untouchable. Not because they were antisocial. Because they understood that the edge is sharpened in silence and dulled in crowds. Your mind is a blade. Every unnecessary social interaction is a stroke against a whetstone running the wrong direction. Principle number 3, recognize that being always available is the fastest way to become always irrelevant, and start treating your absence as currency. Here's something that will sting. You've been taught that visibility equals value. Show up. Be present. Stay active. Keep your name in circulation. Never go dark. This is the doctrine of the desperate. It's what people tell themselves when they have no real power and are trying to substitute frequency of contact for depth of impact. But think about the people you actually respect. Not the ones you see every day. Not the ones who text you constantly. The ones whose absence you feel. The ones who walk into a room and everything shifts because they weren't there 5 minutes ago. The ones who speak rarely and therefore are heard loudly when they do. Availability destroys mystique. And mystique is not a vanity project. Mystique is a power mechanism. When people always know where you are, what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're feeling, they have a complete map of you. And a person who has been fully mapped is a person who can be fully controlled. You've been handing out the blueprints to your own fortress with every status update, every emotional disclosure, every obliging response to a message that didn't deserve your attention. Strategic people make themselves scarce. Not as a game. Not as a manipulation tactic. As a fundamental law of how they operate. They understand that value is partly a function of access. The easier you are to reach, the less reaching you is worth. The more people see you, the less they see you. Familiarity breeds. Not contempt but something worse, indifference. You become furniture. You become part of the landscape. People stop wondering what you're thinking because they assume they already know. They stop anticipating your next move because you don't make moves that surprise them. You've trained everyone in your life to take your presence for granted, and then you wonder why no one seems to value it. Disappear. Not forever. Not dramatically. Just enough that your absence becomes noticeable. Just enough that people have to wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're building. Just enough that the space you leave behind starts doing work that your presence never could. Absence creates speculation. Speculation creates mythology. Mythology creates influence. The person who is always in the room has no mythology. The person who walks in and out of the room on their own schedule becomes the room's most magnetic force. Principle number 4. Build an inner world so rich that outer validation becomes insulting rather than addictive. This is the principle that separates strategic solitude from mere avoidance. Anyone can hide from people. Cowards do it every day. What the dangerous ones do is different. They don't hide from others. They return to themselves. They've built something inside that is so compelling, so absorbing, so intellectually and emotionally dense that the trivial currency of social approval feels like an insult when it's offered. Think about what most people are actually exchanging when they socialize. They're trading validation. I'll tell you you're interesting if you tell me I'm important. I'll laugh at your joke if you validate my opinion. I'll show up to your event if you make me feel seen at mine. It's a circular economy of mutual need, and the currency is worthless. It's fiat approval, printed on nothing, backed by nothing, inflated to the point of meaninglessness. And you've been working overtime to earn it. The person who has cultivated a rich inner life doesn't need this currency. They have their own economy. Their thoughts are more interesting than most conversations. Their projects are more absorbing than most social events. Their relationship with ideas, with their work, with the impersonal pursuit of mastery, is deeper and more sustaining than any collection of acquaintances could ever be. This is what the greatest minds understood. Beethoven's deafness forced him into isolation, and that isolation became the crucible for the most revolutionary music ever written. Not despite his solitude but because of it. The silence didn't take something from him. It gave him access to something no concert hall could provide. Newton's most productive period was spent away from Cambridge, alone in the countryside, and in that solitude he produced work that redefined human understanding of the physical universe. These weren't people who were lonely. These were people whose inner worlds were so vast that the outer world couldn't compete. And here's the cost of not building this: you remain dependent. You remain a person whose emotional state is determined by whether someone texted you back. Whose sense of worth fluctuates with social feedback. Whose weekend is ruined if plans fall through. You remain, fundamentally, a person who is governed by others because you have no internal government strong enough to stand alone. Build the inner world. Fill it with ideas that fascinate you. Fill it with projects that consume you. Fill it with questions so compelling that sitting alone with them feels like the most interesting thing you could possibly do. When you reach that point, solitude stops being something you endure and becomes something you protect. And the person who protects their solitude is the person no one can manipulate, because there's nothing they need from anyone. Principle number 5, master the art of the calibrated withdrawal, where your absence amplifies your influence rather than erasing your relevance from the board entirely. Now here's where we get strategic, because there's a danger in all this that you need to understand. Total isolation is not power. Total isolation is vulnerability. Machiavelli would never advocate cutting yourself off from the world entirely, and neither would any genuine strategist. Withdrawing into a fortress with no windows doesn't make you safe. It makes you blind. If you disappear completely, you stop receiving information. You stop knowing what's happening in the rooms you've left. You lose the ability to anticipate threats, to read shifting dynamics, to position yourself for opportunities that haven't arrived yet. The recluse who cuts all ties isn't powerful. He's just hidden, and hidden is not the same as untouchable. The art is in calibration. You withdraw enough to protect your mental space, sharpen your judgment, and create the power of absence, but you maintain enough contact to stay informed, to keep your finger on the pulse, to remain a player whose name is still on the board even when his body isn't in the room. Think of it like a predator who doesn't stay in the thick of the herd but never loses sight of the herd's movements. You step back. You go quiet. You let the dust settle. But you keep watching. You keep listening. You keep one channel open, just enough to know what's happening without being consumed by it. This is the difference between the monk and the strategist. The monk withdraws from the world entirely and finds peace. The strategist withdraws just enough to find clarity, then uses that clarity to operate in the world with devastating precision. The monk doesn't care what happens in the village. The strategist knows exactly what's happening in the village and chooses when to enter and when to remain in the shadows. So how do you calibrate? You reduce the frequency of your social contact without severing it. You become selective about which rooms you enter and which conversations you engage in. You stop attending events out of obligation and start attending only when there's a strategic reason to be present. You let most messages sit. You let most invitations pass. You become a person who is reachable but not easily reachable, present but not constantly present, known but not fully known. This calibrated scarcity does two things simultaneously. It protects your mental space and it amplifies your perceived value. People start to notice that you're not always around, and that noticing creates interest. Interest creates speculation. Speculation creates narrative. And narrative is something you can shape from the shadows if you're smart about it. You don't want to be forgotten. You want to be wondered about. There's a massive difference, and that difference is the space where influence lives. Principle number 6, use silence as a weapon, because the person who doesn't speak is the person everyone else is trying to read. This principle flows directly from the practice of disappearance, because when you withdraw, you go quiet. And most people are terrified of quiet. They fill it. They over-explain. They justify. They elaborate. They add words upon words upon words, and every word they add is a piece of information they're giving away for free. Strategic silence is one of the most powerful tools in the dark psychology arsenal. When you don't speak, other people speak. And when other people speak, they reveal themselves. They reveal their assumptions, their fears, their priorities, their strategies. Every word someone says in your silence is a card they're showing you. And you're collecting. You've been doing the opposite. You've been the one over-explaining your decisions, justifying your choices, narrating your thought process, making sure everyone understands why you did what you did. And every explanation you've offered has been a gift to people who can now use that information to predict you, to counter you, to manage you. The person who explains himself is the person who is asking for permission. The person who stays silent is the person who is operating from a position that requires no validation. Marcus Aurelius understood this. The Stoic composure isn't just about not reacting emotionally. It's about understanding that silence is a form of power that speech can never match. When you speak, you're giving. When you're silent, you're holding. And the person who holds has more than the person who gives. So when you disappear, disappear quietly. Don't announce it. Don't explain it. Don't post about it. Don't tell people you're taking a break. Just go. Let the silence do the work. Let people wonder. Let them speculate. Let them construct narratives about where you are and what you're doing. Every narrative they construct is a projection of their own mind, and every projection is information you can use later. Silence makes people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people reveal themselves. They reach out. They ask questions. They make offers. They extend invitations. They try to pull you back into the conversation because your silence is louder than their noise, and that imbalance disturbs them. And every move they make to re-engage you tells you exactly how much power you have over them. The person who can sit in silence while everyone else scrambles to fill it is the person who controls the room, even when they're not in it. Principle number 7. Become the kind of person whose solitude is constructive, not decorative, because the difference between the two is the difference between power and pretense. Here's the final principle, and it's the one that separates the real practitioners from the poseurs. A lot of people will hear everything I've said and think they understand it. They'll go quiet on social media. They'll stop answering texts. They'll start being mysteriously unavailable. And they'll be doing absolutely nothing with the solitude they've created. They'll be alone, scrolling, consuming, distracting themselves with the same noise in a smaller room. That's not solitude. That's loneliness with better lighting. Constructive solitude is active. You're not just alone. You're building something. You're thinking through a problem. You're developing a skill. You're constructing a strategy. You're having an internal dialogue that is more rigorous and more demanding than any conversation you could have with another person. You're reading, not to escape, but to arm yourself. You're reflecting, not to wallow, but to course correct. You're planning, not to fantasize, but to determine your next 3 moves with the clarity that only silence can provide. The person who disappears and does nothing with the silence has just wasted the most valuable resource they could have accessed. They've been given a workshop and used it as a waiting room. The most dangerous people in history didn't just withdraw. They withdrew with purpose. They used the solitude to develop the capabilities that later made them unstoppable when they re-entered the game. They came back different. Sharper. Colder. More precise. More certain. They came back with work product, with strategies, with refinements that could only have been forged in the absence of distraction. And here's the test: when you disappear, what do you have to show for it when you return? If the answer is nothing, you weren't practicing solitude. You were hiding. And hiding is not power. Hiding is fear wearing the costume of strategy. So let's bring this together, because every principle we've covered traces back to a single thesis. Presence is borrowed. Absence is owned. When you're always present, you're always performing. When you're always performing, you're always spending. When you're always spending, you're always depleted. And a depleted person is a controllable person. The culture told you that isolation is weakness because the culture needs you present. It needs you consuming, engaging, reacting, responding, clicking, attending, participating. A population of people who are comfortable alone, who think clearly without input, who don't need validation to function, who can sit in silence and come out with strategies instead of complaints, that population is ungovernable. That population is dangerous. You've been conditioned to fear your own company because your own company is where your power lives. The moment you stop being afraid of the empty room is the moment the empty room becomes your greatest asset. The moment you stop needing the crowd is the moment the crowd starts needing you. Not the other way around. Never the other way around. Let me name what this pattern has been costing you, because I want you to feel it before we close. It's been costing you your edge. That sharpness that comes from uninterrupted thinking. It's been costing you your originality, because you can't produce original thought when your mind is a crowded elevator. It's been costing you your authority, because a person who is always accessible carries no weight when they arrive. It's been costing you your self-knowledge, because you've been so busy performing a self that you've never had time to actually develop one. And it's been costing you your freedom, because every relationship you maintain out of fear rather than choice is a chain you forged and locked yourself. Disappear. Not to escape the world. To prepare for it. Withdraw. Not to hide from the game. To learn it well enough to dominate it. Go silent. Not because you have nothing to say. Because you have something so important to say that you refuse to waste it on people who aren't ready to hear it. Build the inner fortress. Fill it with everything that makes you dangerous: clarity, strategy, self-knowledge, emotional control, and the quiet certainty that you do not need anyone's permission to exist powerfully. Then come back. On your terms. On your schedule. With your edge fully restored and your mind fully your own. The ruthless art Machiavelli perfected was never about cruelty. It was about control. Control of self, control of presence, control of when to appear and when to vanish. That art is now yours. Not as theory. As practice. Right now, not tomorrow. This week, go dark. Pick 3 days where you disappear from every channel that isn't essential. No social media. No social obligations. No performing. Just you and the silence and whatever you choose to build inside it. See what happens when the noise stops. See what rises to the surface when you stop drowning it out. See who you actually are when no one is watching, because that person, the one who exists in the silence, that's your real power. And if you've understood everything I've said, if you felt the truth of it in your chest while I've been talking, then type 3 words in the comments right now. I am untouchable. Not because you're arrogant. Because you've finally understood that the fortress was never about keeping people out. It was about keeping yourself intact. Disappear from everyone. And watch your power multiply. That's not a promise. That's a mechanism. And it's already waiting for you to activate it. The question is whether you'll keep scrolling, keep performing, keep draining yourself for people who won't remember your name in their last moments, or whether you'll walk into the silence right now and come back as someone they can never forget.